The autumn wind carried the scent of dying leaves and wood smoke through the streets of Cedar Ridge, Montana, as Samuel McKenna guided his weathered horse toward the town's only saloon. The year was 1887, and the frontier town barely deserved the name. A handful of wooden buildings clustered around a dusty main street, surrounded by endless prairie that stretched toward the distant mountains. Samuel's ranch lay 15 miles north, a modest spread he'd carved from the wilderness with his own hands over the past decade. At 42, Samuel had lived more years alone than he cared to count. His weathered face bore the marks of countless seasons under the harsh Montana sun, and his calloused hands told the story of a man who knew honest work. The townspeople respected him. He was fair in his dealings, paid his debts and kept to himself, but respect didn't fill the empty rooms of his farmhouse or warm the cold nights when winter winds howled across the plains. Today's trip to town was supposed to be routine: pick up supplies, check for mail, maybe share a drink with old Pete at the general store. He hadn't expected to find Thomas Brennan stumbling out of Murphy's saloon in broad daylight, reeking of whiskey and desperation. "McKenna!" Thomas called out, his voice slurred and eyes bloodshot. "Just the man I need to see." Samuel had known Thomas for 3 years, ever since the man had arrived with his young daughter, claiming to be starting fresh after his wife's death. The reality had been far different. Thomas was a drunk who couldn't hold a job and had already burned through whatever money he'd brought from back east. His daughter Emma, now 13, had become a familiar sight around town, too thin and too quiet, often seen mending her father's torn clothes or trying to trade eggs for grain at the general store. "Thomas?" Samuel nodded, dismounting from his horse. Something in the other man's manner made him uneasy. There was a frantic quality to Thomas's movements, a desperate gleam in his eyes that went beyond his usual drunken state. "I got a proposition for you," Thomas said, swaying slightly as he spoke. "You're a good man, McKenna. Everybody says so. You got that big house, all that land, but no family to share it with." Samuel's jaw tightened. "Get to the point, Thomas." "My Emma," Thomas continued, his voice dropping to a whisper as if sharing a great secret. "She's a good girl, smart, hardworking, knows how to cook, clean, tend a garden. She could help you around the place." The words hung in the air between them like smoke from a dying fire. Samuel felt something cold settle in his stomach as he began to understand what Thomas was suggesting. "What exactly are you saying?" Samuel's voice was carefully controlled, though inside he felt a growing disgust. Thomas glanced around nervously, then leaned closer. "I owe money, McKenna, serious money, to serious people. They're coming to collect and I don't have it." His hands shook as he spoke. "But you could use the help. And Emma, she'd be better off with you than what's coming if I can't pay." Samuel stared at the broken man before him, his mind racing. He'd seen Thomas's gambling debts mounting over the past months, had heard whispers about men from Helena asking questions about him. But this... "You're talking about selling your daughter," Samuel said flatly. "I'm talking about giving her a chance." Thomas's voice cracked with something that might have been genuine emotion. "You think I want this? You think I don't know what kind of father I've been?" He wiped his nose with his sleeve, leaving a dark stain on the already filthy fabric. "But those men, they won't just take money if I can't pay. They'll take whatever they can get their hands on. And Emma?" The unfinished sentence hung heavy between them. Samuel had heard stories about debt collectors in the bigger towns, about what happened to families who couldn't pay what they owed. His hands clenched into fists at his sides. "Where is she now?" he asked. "At the boarding house. Mrs. Patterson's been watching her while I tried to figure something out." Thomas's voice was barely audible. "She doesn't know about any of this." Samuel looked down the street toward Mrs. Patterson's boarding house, a tidy 2-story building with flower boxes in the windows. He imagined Emma there, probably helping with chores, unaware that her father was 3 streets away trying to trade her life for his debts. "How much do you owe?" Samuel asked quietly. $150. The amount might as well have been 1,000 for a man like Thomas. Samuel was quiet for a long moment, his mind working through the implications. $150 was a significant sum, but not beyond his means. His cattle sales had been good this year, and he'd been careful with his money. But this wasn't about money. This was about a 13-year-old girl whose father was too weak and selfish to protect her. "If I pay your debt," Samuel said slowly, "what happens to Emma?" Thomas's face brightened with desperate hope. "She comes with you, as your ward. You'd be responsible for her, see, legal and everything. She'd work for her keep, and you'd have someone to help around the place. It's a good arrangement for everyone." The wind picked up, sending dust devils dancing down the empty street. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked and the sound of hammer on metal rang from the blacksmith shop. Normal sounds of a normal day, while two men stood discussing the sale of a child as if she were livestock. Samuel thought about his empty house, about the silence that greeted him every evening when he returned from checking his cattle. He thought about Emma Brennan with her serious dark eyes and quick intelligence, reduced to a bargaining chip in her father's desperate game. "I need to think about this," Samuel said finally. "There's no time." Thomas grabbed Samuel's arm, his fingers digging in like claws. "They're coming tomorrow, maybe tonight. Please, McKenna, you're the only one who can help." Samuel pulled his arm free, studying Thomas's face. Beneath the desperation and the drink, he saw something else, a flicker of relief. As if Thomas had already convinced himself that this was the best solution, that he was doing something noble instead of unthinkable. Samuel walked away from Thomas without another word, his boots echoing on the wooden sidewalk as he made his way toward Mrs. Patterson's boarding house. The afternoon sun cast long shadows between the buildings, and the air carried the familiar scents of horses, dust, and the distant smoke from dinner fires being lit in homes throughout the small town. His mind churned with Thomas's proposition. Every instinct told him to walk away, to let Thomas face the consequences of his own poor choices. But the image of Emma Brennan wouldn't leave his thoughts. The quiet girl who'd grown thin over the past year, who rarely spoke unless spoken to, who carried herself with a dignity that seemed far beyond her 13 years. Mrs. Patterson's boarding house stood at the corner of Main and Oak, its white paint still relatively fresh, despite the harsh Montana weather. Samuel had known Martha Patterson for years. She was a widow who'd turned her home into a boarding house after her husband died in a mining accident. She was practical, kind, and had a sharp eye for people's true nature. The front door opened before Samuel could knock, and Martha appeared, wiping her hands on her apron. She was a woman in her 50s, with graying hair pulled back in a practical bun and eyes that missed nothing. "Samuel McKenna," she said, her voice carrying a note of concern. "I wondered when you'd come by. That girl's been helping me with the washing all afternoon, asking every few minutes if her father had come back yet. Is she here now? In the back garden, hanging sheets?" Martha stepped aside to let him enter, then closed the door behind him. "Samuel, I've got to ask, do you know what Thomas Brennan is planning? Because that man came by this morning looking like he'd seen the devil himself, and he left Emma here with nothing but the clothes on her back, and some story about needing to take care of business." Samuel removed his hat, turning it slowly in his hands. "I just spoke with him. Martha, what do you know about Emma's situation at home?" The older woman's expression darkened. "More than I'd like to. That girl's been practically raising herself since they came to town. Thomas drinks away whatever money he earns. And Emma, she's been trading sewing work for food, trying to keep them both fed. I've offered to help, but she's too proud to accept charity." Through the window, Samuel could see the back garden where laundry hung on lines stretched between two apple trees. A slender figure moved among the white sheets, and he caught a glimpse of dark hair and a faded blue dress. "Martha, if something were to happen to Thomas, if he had to leave town suddenly, what would become of Emma?" Martha's hands stilled on her apron. "Are you asking as a friend or as someone who might be able to help?" "I'm not sure yet." She studied his face for a long moment. "She's a good girl, Samuel. Smart as a whip, works harder than most grown women I know, but she's been carrying burdens no child should have to carry. If Thomas is in the kind of trouble I think he is," she shook her head, "that girl deserves better than what life's given her so far." Samuel nodded slowly. "Could you ask her to come in? I'd like to speak with her." "Of course." Martha disappeared through the kitchen door, and Samuel heard quiet voices in the garden. A few minutes later, she returned with Emma trailing behind her. Samuel had seen Emma around town countless times, but he'd never really looked at her, really seen her. She was small for her age, with dark hair that needed cutting and clothes that had been mended too many times, but her eyes were what struck him most. They were intelligent, wary, and held a sadness that no 13-year-old should carry. "Hello, Mr. McKenna," Emma said quietly, her hands clasped in front of her. "Mrs. Patterson said you wanted to speak with me." "Yes, Emma. Please sit down." Samuel gestured to one of Martha's kitchen chairs, and Emma perched on the edge, as if ready to flee at any moment. "Is this about my father?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Samuel exchanged a glance with Martha, who nodded encouragingly. "Emma, what has your father told you about your current situation?" "He said he had business to take care of, and that I should wait here until he got back." Emma's fingers twisted together in her lap, but he had that look in his eyes, the same one he gets when he's scared about something, and he gave me this." She reached into her dress pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper, worn soft from handling. Samuel recognized it immediately. It was a letter he'd written to Thomas 3 months ago, recommending him for a job at the lumber mill. Thomas had never followed through on the opportunity. "He said to give this to you if something happened to him." Emma's voice was steady, but Samuel could see the fear in her eyes. "Mr. McKenna, is my father in trouble?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Samuel looked at this young girl who had already learned to expect the worst from life, who was trying so hard to be brave while her world crumbled around her. "Emma," he said gently, "what would you say if I told you that your father might have to go away for a while?" She was quiet for a long moment, her dark eyes studying his face. When she spoke, her voice was matter-of-fact, as if she'd already considered this possibility. "I'd say that I'm not surprised, and I'd ask what's going to happen to me." The directness of her response caught Samuel off guard. This wasn't a child living in denial about her father's problems. This was someone who had learned to face hard truths head-on. "If that were to happen," Samuel said carefully, "how would you feel about coming to live on my ranch? You'd have your own room, regular meals, and you'd help me with the household tasks. It would be honest work and you'd be safe." Emma's eyes widened slightly, but she didn't respond immediately. Instead, she looked at Martha, who gave her an encouraging nod. "Would I be a servant?" Emma asked. "No," Samuel said firmly. You'd be like family, someone I'm responsible for, someone under my protection." "And my father?" Samuel hesitated. The truth was, he didn't know what would happen to Thomas. The man might flee town, might face his creditors, might end up in jail or worse. But Emma deserved honesty, even if it was painful. "I don't know, Emma, but I do know that right now you need someone to take care of you, and He paused, surprised by his own words. "I could use the company." Emma was quiet for a long time, her gaze moving between Samuel and Martha. Finally, she straightened her shoulders in a gesture that reminded Samuel of a soldier preparing for battle. "When would I need to decide?" she asked. "Soon," Samuel admitted. "Tonight, possibly." Emma nodded, as if she'd expected as much. "May I have a few minutes to think about it?" "Of course." She stood and walked to the window, looking out at the sheets flapping in the afternoon breeze. Samuel watched her small figure silhouetted against the light and felt something shift in his chest, a protective instinct he hadn't experienced in years. Emma stood at the window for what felt like an eternity, though Samuel knew it had only been a few minutes. The late afternoon light was beginning to fade, casting the garden in golden hues that made the white sheets glow like lanterns. He watched her small shoulders rise and fall with each breath, and he found himself holding his own breath, waiting for her decision. When she finally turned around, her face had changed. The wary uncertainty was gone, replaced by a quiet resolve that made her seem older than her 13 years. "Mr. McKenna," she said, her voice steady, "before I give you my answer, I need to ask you something." "Of course. Why are you doing this? You don't owe my father anything, you don't owe me anything, so why?" The question was direct and honest, and Samuel realized he owed her the same in return. He glanced at Martha, who was quietly busying herself with putting away clean dishes, but he knew she was listening to every word. "Because," Samuel said slowly, choosing his words carefully, "I've been alone for a long time, and because you deserve better than what you've been given. And maybe we could help each other." Emma studied his face for a long moment. "What do you mean, help each other?" "I mean that a house isn't a home when there's only one person living in it. And I mean that you're smart and capable, and you shouldn't have to spend your life worrying about where your next meal is coming from or whether your father is going to come home at night." "And what would I do on your ranch?" Samuel had been thinking about this since he'd left Thomas in front of the saloon. "You'd help me manage the household, cooking, cleaning, mending, but you'd also learn other things. How to read and write better, how to manage accounts, maybe even how to handle livestock. Skills that would serve you well no matter what your future holds." Emma's eyes brightened slightly at this. "You'd teach me to read better?" "I would. I have books at the ranch. Not many, but enough to start with. And we could order more from Helena, or even Denver if you wanted." For the first time since he'd known her, Samuel saw something approaching hope in Emma's expression, but then her face clouded again. "What about my father? What's going to happen to him?" Samuel exchanged another glance with Martha, who gave him a slight nod of encouragement. "Emma, your father has made some poor choices, and now he has to face the consequences of those choices. I can't protect him from that, and honestly, I'm not sure anyone can, but I can protect you." Emma was quiet for a moment, processing this. When she spoke again, her voice was small but determined. "If I come with you, would I be able to visit him? If he stays in town? If that's what you want, and if it's safe for you to do so, then yes." Emma nodded slowly, then looked at Martha. "Mrs. Patterson, what do you think I should do?" Martha set down the dish she'd been drying and turned to face Emma fully. "Child, I think you've been taking care of yourself for longer than anyone should have to, and I think Mr. McKenna is offering you something that doesn't come along very often, a real chance at a better life." "But what if—" Emma started, then stopped. "What if what, dear?" Martha prompted gently. "What if I'm not good enough? What if I can't do the work properly? Or what if Mr. McKenna changes his mind?" Samuel felt something tighten in his chest. The fear in her voice was so raw, so honest, that it made him angry at Thomas all over again. How many times had this girl been let down, disappointed, made to feel like she wasn't worthy of care and protection? "Emma," he said firmly, "you've been managing a household and taking care of a grown man for months now, all while trying to find ways to put food on the table. I have no doubt about your abilities, and as for changing my mind—" He paused, realizing the weight of what he was about to promise. "I don't make commitments lightly. If you come with me, you'll have a home for as long as you need one." Emma looked between Samuel and Martha one more time, then took a deep breath. "All right," she said quietly. "I'll come with you." Relief flooded through Samuel, though he tried not to show it. "Are you sure?" "Yes." Emma's voice was stronger now. "But I have conditions." Samuel almost smiled at this. Even in her desperate situation, Emma was trying to maintain some control over her circumstances. "What conditions?" "I want to be able to write to Mrs. Patterson, to let her know how I'm doing, and if my father gets better, if he stops drinking and gets his life together, I want to be able to see him. Those seem like reasonable conditions to me, and I want to earn my keep. I don't want to be charity. I want to work for what I get." "You will," Samuel assured her. "Running a ranch household is real work, and you'll be doing your fair share." Emma nodded, seeming satisfied with his responses. Then she looked down at her hands, and when she spoke again, her voice was almost too quiet to hear. "Mr. McKenna, what should I call you?" The question caught Samuel off guard. He hadn't thought about it, but it was important. Too formal and she'd feel like a servant. Too familiar, and it might be uncomfortable for both of them. "What would you like to call me?" Emma was quiet for a moment. Could I just call you Samuel? When it's just us, I mean. And Mr. McKenna when other people are around? I think that would be fine." Just then, the front door of the boarding house burst open, and Thomas Brennan stumbled in, his face flushed and his clothes even more disheveled than before. His eyes were wild as they darted around the room, finally settling on Emma. "There you are," he said, his words slightly slurred. "Come on, we're leaving. Now." Emma stepped closer to Samuel instinctively, and he moved protectively in front of her. "Where are you going, Thomas?" Samuel asked calmly. "Away from here. Far away. Pack your things, Emma. We're taking the evening stage." "Thomas," Martha said firmly, "you can't just—" "I can do whatever I want with my own daughter." Thomas's voice rose, and Emma flinched behind Samuel. Samuel felt his temper flare, but he kept his voice level. "And what about your debts, Thomas? What about the men who are looking for you?" Thomas's face went pale. That's been taken care of." "Has it?" Samuel stepped forward slightly. "Because those men are going to be very interested in where you got the money to skip town, and when they find out you don't have it—" "I said it's been taken care of," Thomas shouted, but there was no conviction in his voice. Emma moved around Samuel to face her father directly. "Papa," she said quietly, "Mr. McKenna has offered me a place to stay, a good place, where I'll be safe and cared for." Thomas's bloodshot eyes fixed on his daughter, and for a moment Samuel saw a flicker of the man he might have been under different circumstances. "Emma, baby, you belong with me. I'm your father." "I know," Emma said, and Samuel could hear the pain in her voice. "But Papa, you can't take care of me anymore, and I can't take care of both of us." The words hung in the air like a death sentence, and Thomas seemed to deflate before their eyes. Thomas stared at his daughter, his mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. The silence in Martha's kitchen stretched taut as a bowstring, broken only by the distant sound of horses passing on the street outside. "Emma," he whispered finally, his voice cracking, "you don't mean that." But even as he spoke, Samuel could see that Thomas knew she did. The man's shoulders sagged as if all the fight had gone out of him, and his hands trembled as he reached toward his daughter. Emma didn't step back, but she didn't move forward either. "Papa, I love you, but I can't live like this anymore." I can't spend every day wondering if you're going to come home, or if there'll be food, or if someone's going to come looking for money we don't have." Thomas's face crumpled, and for a moment he looked like the broken man he truly was, not the bluster and bravado he'd shown at the saloon, but someone who had lost everything that mattered and finally understood what he'd done. "I tried," he said, his voice barely audible. "After your mother died, I tried to be what you needed, but everything I touched turned to dust, and the bottle made it easier to forget. I know you tried, Papa." Emma's voice was gentle now, filled with a compassion that made Samuel's throat tight. But trying isn't enough anymore. Samuel watched this exchange with a mixture of anger and pity. Part of him wanted to throw Thomas out, to protect Emma from any more pain, but another part recognized that this moment, however painful, was necessary. Emma needed to say goodbye to her father on her own terms. Thomas looked around the room as if seeing it for the first time, his gaze finally settling on Samuel. "You'll take care of her? Really take care of her?" "I will," Samuel said simply. "And you won't hurt her, or make her do anything she shouldn't have to do." The question revealed just how desperate Thomas had been, how little he'd thought through the implications of his proposal. Samuel's voice was steel when he replied, "Emma will be safe with me. She'll be treated with respect and kindness, and she'll have opportunities to learn and grow, I give you my word." Thomas nodded slowly, then reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small, wrapped bundle. He held it out to Emma with shaking hands. "This was your mother's," he said. "The only thing of value I didn't sell or gamble away. I wanted you to have it." Emma took the bundle carefully, unwrapping the faded cloth to reveal a simple silver locket on a thin chain. It wasn't expensive, the kind of jewelry a working man might buy for his bride, but it gleamed softly in the lamplight. "She wore it every day," Thomas continued, his voice thick with emotion. "Said it brought her luck. Maybe it'll bring you some too." Emma fastened the locket around her neck, her fingers tracing the delicate surface. "Thank you, Papa." Thomas looked like he wanted to say more, but footsteps on the front porch interrupted him. Martha moved to the window and peered out, her face growing grave. "Thomas," she said quietly, "there are 3 men coming up the walk. They don't look like they're here for tea and conversation." Thomas went white as fresh snow. "They found me." Samuel moved quickly to the window and saw 3 rough-looking men approaching the boarding house. Their clothes marked them as not from Cedar Ridge, city clothes, expensive boots, and the kind of hard faces that came from years of collecting debts by whatever means necessary. "Is there a back way out?" Samuel asked Martha. "Through the kitchen, but they'll see him if he goes that way." Samuel made a quick decision. "Thomas, get upstairs. Now, find a room and stay quiet." "But Emma is coming with me, right now." Samuel turned to the girl, who was watching the approaching men with frightened eyes. "Do you have anything here you need to take?" Emma shook her head. "Just what I'm wearing." The front door rattled under heavy knocks, and a gruff voice called out, "Open up, we're looking for Thomas Brennan." Martha smoothed her apron and walked calmly to the door, while Samuel positioned himself between Emma and the entrance. Thomas had disappeared up the back stairs, his footsteps barely audible on the wooden floors above. "Good evening, gentlemen," Martha said as she opened the door, her voice perfectly pleasant. "What can I do for you?" "We're looking for Thomas Brennan," the largest of the 3 men said, pushing past Martha into the house. "We know he's been staying here." "Mr. Brennan left this morning," Martha replied smoothly, "took the early stage to Helena, said something about visiting relatives." The man's eyes swept the kitchen, taking in Samuel and Emma. "And who might you be?" "Samuel McKenna," Samuel replied evenly. "I own a ranch north of town." "And the girl?" Samuel felt Emma tense beside him, but he kept his voice casual. "My ward. I'm taking her home." The man studied them both for a long moment, then nodded to his companions. "Search the house. Check every room." "Now see here," Martha began, but the man cut her off. "Ma'am, Thomas Brennan owes our employer a considerable sum of money. We're going to find him one way or another." Samuel heard footsteps above as the men began their search, and he prayed that Thomas had found a good hiding place. Beside him, Emma stood perfectly still, her hand unconsciously touching the locket at her throat. The search seemed to take forever, but finally the men returned to the kitchen, their expressions frustrated. "He's not here," one of them reported. The leader's eyes narrowed as he looked at Martha again. "If you're lying to us, old woman." "I've told you the truth," Martha replied firmly. "Thomas Brennan left on the morning stage." The man stared at her for another long moment, then turned to Samuel. "You didn't happen to see which direction that stage was headed, did you?" "East," Samuel lied without hesitation. toward Helena, and then onto the railroad. The leader nodded slowly, then gestured to his men. "We'll check the stage office, then follow the route. If Brennan thinks he can run from us, he's got another thing coming." As the three men filed out of the boarding house, Samuel felt Emma's small hand slip into his. Her fingers were cold, but her grip was steady. "Are they gone?" she whispered. Samuel waited until he heard horses departing before answering. "They're gone." Thomas appeared at the top of the stairs, his face ashen. He descended slowly, as if each step cost him tremendous effort. "They'll be back," he said quietly. "When they realize I'm not on that stage, they'll come back. Then you need to be gone before they do," Samuel replied. "Tonight." Thomas nodded, then looked at Emma one last time. "I'm sorry, baby girl, for all of it. I'm sorry I couldn't be the father you deserved." Emma stepped forward and hugged him, a quick, fierce embrace that spoke of love and forgiveness and goodbye all at once. "Be safe, Papa," she whispered. Thomas held her for a moment, then gently pushed her back towards Samuel. "Take care of her," he said, his voice breaking. "She's the best thing I ever did in this world." "I will," Samuel promised. Thomas nodded once, then walked out the back door and disappeared into the gathering darkness. Emma watched him go, tears streaming down her face, but she didn't call out or try to follow. Samuel placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Are you ready to go home, Emma?" She wiped her eyes with her sleeve and straightened her shoulders, that familiar gesture of determination. "Yes," she said quietly. "I'm ready." As they walked out to Samuel's horse in the cool evening air, Emma looked up at him with eyes that held both sadness and hope. "Samuel," she said softly. "Yes? Thank you for giving me a chance at something better." Samuel helped her up onto his horse, then swung up behind her. As they rode out of Cedar Ridge under a canopy of stars, he found himself thinking that maybe, just maybe, she was giving him a chance at something better too. "You're welcome, Emma," he said into the quiet night. "You're welcome." Behind them, the lights of the town grew smaller and smaller, until finally they disappeared altogether, leaving only the vast Montana sky and the promise of a new beginning waiting at the end of the road.